South Carolina wins the football games. Georgia wins the SEC Eastern Division. MarkRogersTV and ProFootballCentral.com on the SEC's first mammoth matchup of 2013. It's Georgia hosting South Carolina. The reason we say that is that the Gamecocks have defeated the Bulldogs 3 consecutive seasons. But for the past 2, Georgia's gotten past that one loss against South Carolina to still represent the SEC East in Atlanta. Let's match it up in 2013. Aaron Murray, much talked about, 1-10 record against top 10 opponents, and unfortunately for Georgia, South Carolina comes into this game rated number 6 in the country. Still, Murray has played well recently against those top opponents, most notably in the SEC championship game against Alabama. The much-to-do 4 yards from the BCS National Championship game in which Murray led the would-be game-winning drive late in the game and threw for 365 against the Crimson Tide, against Nebraska in the bowl game, and then against Clemson last week. 20 of 29 for 333 passing in a 38-35 loss. Murray, though, against South Carolina last year, 11 of 31 for 109 yards and 1 pick. A horrendous showing, but not necessarily his fault. The big key in that game was that the South Carolina front 4 completely ambushed and overwhelmed the Georgia offensive line. The Georgia offensive line lost so much from the 2011 squad. These guys were just breaking in, getting their legs, getting their chemistry together. And again, they were outmanned in that game, but they matured, they got much better, and they played so well as a unit down the stretch in 2012. Played well last week in providing Murray with time against the Clemson defense, although there were some sacks, specifically and some pressure from Vic Beasley of Clemson. But Todd Gurley ran 12 times for $154, so the Georgia offensive line, we give kudos to them. They are experienced and cohesive at this point, specifically with David Andrews at center. 15 career starts. Canarius Gates with 15. Dallas Lee with 15. John Theus with 15. Chris Burdett with 13 career starts for Georgia. On the defensive front for the South Carolina Gamecocks, they looked dominant at times against North Carolina, especially in the run game, with Chaz Sutton, 2 tackles for loss. Jadeveon Clowney, can he keep his breath? Can he stay on the field? A lot of people are saying he's determined to prove himself after the criticism with only 3 tackles and 3 hurries against the quarterback last week. But I don't think you can gain your wind, and all that determination goes out the door when you're huffing and puffing for wind in the second and third quarters and after being on the field for 8 and 10 play drives. So we shall see what Jadeveon Clowney has. He should have conditioned during the summer because he is in a hole in regards to conditioning, and it's difficult to do it in season. TJ Gurley had 9 tackles for South Carolina last week. Kelsey Quarles, a player we really like, who's been producing at South Carolina his entire career with a sack and a tackle for loss against North Carolina, and TJ Holloman with 4 tackles. So they lose DJ Swearinger to the NFL draft from 2012. He was basically the leader on defense at safety, but they bring back so much talent. South Carolina's got a huge edge, defense versus defense. Georgia, of course, lost so much to the NFL with Jarvis Jones and company. Alec Ogletree going to the NFL in the offseason. Their top performers against Clemson and only bringing back 2 or 1 starters, depending on your depth chart from last season. Ramak Wilson with 13 tackles against Clemson, and Amarlo Herrera with 12 tackles. The guy that we think is key in this game is Damian Swann, the safety for the Georgia Bulldogs. Not only in the pass defense, but also in the run defense against Connor Shaw in particular. This is where South Carolina's got a bit of an edge over Georgia. Murray's in the pocket. If he doesn't get protection, forget it for Georgia. If Connor Shaw's plays break down, he can run. He's a physical runner. He's fast. He knows the running lanes. He loves to run with the football. Actually, to a fault at times. He usually looks at the first receiver, then he tucks it and runs. But it usually pays off for South Carolina. And so Damian Swann's going to have to come up and run support to close off the gaps in the running lanes for Connor Shaw, who completed 10 of 19 for $149 and 1 touchdown, and most importantly, no picks against North Carolina. Keep in mind that the South Carolina backup quarterback situation is in much better shape with the capable Dylan Thompson, who ran passed for 310 yards and 3 touchdowns against Clemson last year, threw the game-winning touchdown against Michigan in the Outback Bowl, threw 1 pass against North Carolina. That was for a touchdown as well. So the backup quarterback situation in case of injury, much better for South Carolina. Mike Jones is a nice running back, but exclude the 75-yard touchdown run against a smallish North Carolina front that was being manhandled up front by the South Carolina front, and Jones only ran it for 40 yards on 11 carries. So Georgia's got a fighting chance in the run game against South Carolina, although we did note in that win the contributions of that South Carolina offensive line that certainly dominated when you talk about Corey Robinson at left tackle with 10 career starts, A.J. Cann with 26 career starts at left guard for South Carolina, Roland Patrick at right guard with 14 career starts, and Brandon Shell at right tackle with 11 career starts. That's how South Carolina stacks up. They're going to need a receiver to step up in this game. Early in the game, last week in week 1 against North Carolina, it was Shaq Rowland who caught 2 for 75 in the big touchdown early in the game, 65 yards from Connor Shaw. Up top, Demir Byrd, look out for him, but the guy that we really think needs to have a prominent role in the passing game if he's healthy, and he's been nicked up, Bruce Ellington. Because of his size, he's a mismatch issue for the Georgia Bulldogs in the secondary. 1 catch last week against the Tar Heels for 17 yards. That's the matchup, Georgia-South Carolina. So on the side of the Bulldogs, experienced, polished quarterback, great running back, experienced offensive line that should have learned something and has something to prove after what happened against South Carolina last year. Wide receiver, they're good, they're not great. Chris Conley caught 5 for 67 last week. You also have Michael Bennett coming off an ACL injury. It was good to see him back on the field, catch 5 passes for 60 yards. But Malcolm Mitchell, of course, got hurt in the end zone on that celebration. The chest bump just didn't work out for him. He's gone for 2013. He will be missed after catching 40 passes for the Bulldogs and Aaron Murray last season. So, quarterback and the great running back Gurley. A defense that's very talented, very fast. It's a typical upper echelon SEC defense, but very inexperienced. I don't know how much we can take from the Clemson game because they should improve in Game 2. That was their first performance for a lot of those guys against possibly the best offense in the country on the road. For South Carolina, they've got possibly, along with Gurley, the best physical specimen on the field in Jadeveon Clowney. Can he be determined and answer the critics and have a big game? I think the conditioning issue is an issue to stay to a certain extent until the weather cools. Don't know what the forecast is in Athens. It can't be nearly what it was in South Carolina, most likely last week when it was like 94 degrees with high humidity, but Clowney's conditioning still an issue. But still, plenty of playmakers on that South Carolina defense, and if you listen to me, you typically go with the defense, and we like South Carolina and the running threat at quarterback with Connor Shaw in a close one against Georgia. So take South Carolina, take the 3.5 points. Gamecocks win it over the Bulldogs of Georgia, 27-24. That's the Georgia-South Carolina matchup. Would love to hear what you have to say about this one. Should be a good one right here on Mark Rogers TV and ProFootballCentral.com.